Boat, and welcome to Ralph Reads, brought to you by TURN, the United Ronin Networks. My name is Ralph Anthony Garcia, also known as R4. Please like, share, comment, and subscribe to the United Ronin Networks. We are Ronin. On this edition of Ralph Reads, I will continue this unforgiving miniseries written by the one and only Mr. Donald Goines. Black Girl Lost. Come one, come all, it's story time. Let the reading commence. Chapter 8. When Chink got out of the car, Sandra sat silently waiting. Once she got out and walked up to the corner. On the way back, she heard the gunshots coming from the apartment building. The noise hadn't been too loud. Some people might mistake it for a car backfiring, but she knew better. She hurried to the car and got the motor running. When Chink came out of the building, walking as if he had all the time in the world, she glanced uneasily up and down the streets. Nobody was paying any attention to them. She pulled away just as soon as he got in. "Hey, baby, what's your rush?" he said and grinned at her. Sandra didn't answer, but she continued to drive. She took Normandy Street straight out towards 110th, cutting in and out of traffic all the while. "Take it easy, mama. The only thing that will get us busted is your driving. Don't get stopped now. Everything is cool." He glanced at her to see if she was shook up. She didn't appear to be too nervous, just excited. "Did everything go all right, honey?" she finally got around to asking. "Yeah, baby, everything went just fine. Our friend George won't be setting up anybody else unless it's in hell," Chink stated, then laughed loudly. "Just where in the hell are you taking me anyway?" he asked suddenly. "Home," she exclaimed shortly. "I don't care what you say either. We're going home and have a few minutes to ourselves, Daddy." Her hand dropped down on his lap. If her words hadn't clinched it, her actions did. Sandra was the first woman who had ever given herself to Chink. She had been a virgin, and he had never forgotten it. The thought of her in his arms was enough to set his mind aflame. He had laid in the county jail too many nights remembering her. Now it was going to come true again. He could hardly wait. It was as though he was a young kid getting ready to go on a honeymoon. He looked forward to it with excitement. After Sandra parked, he almost carried her across the parking lot in his hurry. She smiled in the dark as she felt his strong arms around her. How nice it was to be wanted and to be with the one you wanted. "It's been so long, Daddy," she murmured in his ear. "It won't be long now," he exclaimed, and helped her to unlock the door. They stood inside the door and kissed. It was a long, passionate kiss, one that held all their hopes and fears. It was as if they realized that their love would be brief, that time was against them, and they had to live for the moment. "Honey, can I fix you something, anything?" she asked in a husky voice. Chink stared down into the deep black eyes that looked up at him with such affection. His heart skipped a beat. What could he do to show this lovely child of God that her love was returned 1,000 times over? "Fix nothing, baby. Just let me hold you close. What could I possibly want other than you?" They kissed again, and Chink carried her into the bedroom. Once there, he began to undress her slowly. Each piece of clothing came off with loving care. Sandra lay back against the soft sheets and held her arms open for him. Her embrace was like a hot, burning fire, and he was consumed in the flames of her heat. He cried out once, then threw himself back into the consuming fire. They lay in each other's arms later, resting. The night was theirs, and no one could take it from them. Sandra held him close and wondered how many more nights like this would she be allowed. She trembled slightly as she thought of the answer. Later, after Sandra had drifted off to sleep, Chink lay awake and stared at the ceiling. This was the best time in the world for him to strike. very few people knew he was out, the ones who counted anyway. The people he had to reach only could be reached as long as they didn't know he was home. But once they found out he was loose, they'd go into hiding. Chink got out of the bed slowly, not wanting to disturb his woman. He dressed in the dark, then went to Sandra's purse and got the car keys. It would be best to leave her home. The less she was involved, the better. He removed the pistol and broke it open. There weren't but 4 shells left. He opened up the dresser and searched, but couldn't find any more shells. More than likely, he assumed, the 6 that came with the gun were all she had. He grinned in the dark. It was just like a woman, he thought, as he stuffed some money into his pocket. Chink walked back over to the bed and glanced down at Sandra. He wanted to lean down and kiss the tender lips, and all at once he was overcome with a longing that shook him all the way down to his toes. It was a desire to hold her so tight, to keep all the hardships in life away from her. Oh, if he only could, how sweet it would be. Suddenly her eyes opened and she stared up at him. The first thing she did was smile. "Hi there. Don't tell me you were planning on leaving me," she inquired softly. "You've been laying there faking it, woman. How long you been awake?" "Oh, I don't really know, honey. Should we try and go back to the moment that you first got out of bed? You looked so cute searching around in the dark that I couldn't spoil your fun for you. Now could I?" Sandra asked. Chink laughed. "Well, I guess you couldn't. Now that you're awake, or rather now that I know that you're awake, how about letting me know if there are any other shells around anywhere? I hope you bought more than just the 6 that came with that gun." Sandra shook her head. "No, Daddy, I'm sorry about that. The nigga I got the gun from didn't have any more shells, so I got what I could." She looked away from him, not wanting to see his eyes. For a moment, she felt as if she had let him down. How stupid of her. She should have realized that he would need more than just 6 bullets, but it had escaped her mind for some reason. "Hey there, doll. We ain't gonna have long faces now. That won't do at all." "It's nothing, Sandra. Anybody would have done the same thing. Getting the gun was the big thing, baby. Picking me up was the big thing, baby. So don't let such a small thing as not having bought enough shells disturb you whatsoever, you hear?" He gave her a big squeeze. She slipped her arms around his neck and tried to pull him back into bed. Chink laughed pleasantly. "You make me feel so good, Mama. I mean it. I never felt the way I feel when I'm near you." He kissed her slowly, then removed her arms from around his neck. "Honey, I've got business to take care of. If I stay anywhere near you, I'll forget about it." "Daddy, I was wondering, can't it wait until tomorrow or next week or next month for that matter? I mean, if we just gonna stay here out of sight, Chink, ain't nobody gonna come around, 'cause don't nobody know I stay here. I didn't even let Jimmy's wife know, so we ain't got no worry. We still got money in the bank, so we ain't worried about cash for the time being." "Sandra, honey, just stop and think for a minute." He reached up and patted the bandage on the side of her face. "This is the reason why I came home, baby. I love laying up with you. Ain't no doubt about that. But this is our #1 concern. Making sure the motherfuckers pay. So far, we ain't did nothing. That punk, he ain't even count. The motherfucker I want is Tree. And I'm planning on having him or his partner sometime this morning." "I'm sorry, Daddy. I hadn't forgotten, but it was so beautiful just having you home with me that I forget everything in my desire to keep you near. Can you understand where I'm coming from? I just want you." With that, she pressed her head to his chest and sobbed quietly. Hey, baby, hey. What's all this shit? Don't do that to me. Dry up them tears, honey, and everything is gonna be aight. He kissed her gently, then laid her back on the bed. He glanced at the clock. "It's 6 o'clock, Sandra. I was waiting for this time of the morning, honey. People are getting up and going to work, so I won't be too conspicuous. I can move around fairly well this early without too much trouble." "Why don't you let me go with you then?" she asked. Her voice was strong now. There were no signs of tears anymore. "Honey, I'd love nothing better. But as I said, if I move by myself, I'm not conspicuous this early in the morning. But if I have you with me, well, we both become something other than a poor nigga trying to make it to work. You're too young looking, first of all. They might just stop me out of curiosity, wondering what the fuck I'm doing with such a young girl out at such an hour. He grinned at her, taking the sting out of his words. Babyface, he said, teasing her. That's what you get for looking so tender. He kissed her again, then became serious. But don't worry, honey. I'll just knock off one of them motherfuckers, then come running home, okay? Chink finally made his escape from his woman. He smiled in the morning darkness as he opened the door to the car. Sandra didn't realize just how tempted he had been to accept her offer of just laying up with her for about a month. After this shit was over, he'd do just that. Go into hiding, stay in the bed, and watch television for a month or two. By then, the heat should be off, making his escape more easy. He realized that by now, the police probably had an APB out on him. The big car drove smoothly, and for the moment, he just sat back and enjoyed the ride. Chick made sure he stayed within the speed limit. When he reached Western and 68th Avenue, he saw a black and white police car. They turned in behind him, making his heart beat faster. He felt the gun in his waistband. It gave him a feeling of comfort. He knew they'd never take him easy. If they had any thoughts of the matter, it had better be on holding court in the street, because that was the way he was going to play it. When he reached Manchester and Western, the police car turned off. Chink gave a sigh of relief. He wasn't frightened of the police, but he didn't want any trouble with them. Not yet anyway. Not until after he had paid off his debt. Then whatever happened, it would be all right with him. Chink spotted another police car and a curse exploded from him. The second police car made up his mind for him. He had wanted to find Tree, but since Fred lived so close to where he was at, he decided to stop by and pay old Fred a visit. He pulled up and parked 2 doors away from the house next to the alley. He got out and walked back up the street. Chink stopped and checked the address. It matched the one he had. He strolled up to the door and knocked. It took a second heavy knock, then a wait of a few minutes before an angry woman came to the door. She glared out the screen door at him. "What could you possibly want, young man, at this hour of the morning?" she inquired, as she pulled her wrapper tighter around her large waist. Chink could see the huge tits trying to bust out from under the ragged gown the woman wore. "I'm sorry, ma'am, but you see, I was supposed to stop by and pick Fred up this morning. He asked me if I could get a job for him out where I work." He stopped to see how she was taking it. The sound of job had done the trick because the woman smiled at him and opened the screen door. "Well, come on in then. Fred's got his ass in the bed, but I'll sure as hell get him out of there if a job's involved." Chink followed her into the living room. "You ain't got to go to no trouble, ma'am. I'll go wake him up if you'll just point out where he sleeps. That way, you can go on back to bed and get your rest or fix yourself some coffee or something. I'm just sorry that I had to wake you up, but since my boss told me to bring him in today, I just had to let him know that here was his chance." Fred's mother glanced at Chink and smiled. "My God," she said to herself, "he's ugly, but he seems so nice. That's generally the way it is, though. Find someone born looking like that, and they turn out to have the nicest personality. I'll tell you what," she said, turning and facing Chink direct. "You go in his bedroom and wake him up. By the time he's up, I'll have some hot coffee for both of you. How about that?" Chink smiled at her. "Missus, now don't you go to no trouble now. You ain't got to put yourself out for me. I'd appreciate some coffee, but I don't want you to go through no trouble." She grinned, pleased with herself. "Now don't you worry about that. It ain't no problem. I was going to fix myself a potful anyway, so adding a little more water ain't no trouble at all." She raised her hand and pointed out a bedroom. "That's where you'll find that lazy nigga. If he acts like he don't want to go, you just yell out for me. He better not turn this job down. I mean, he just better not if he wants a roof over his head. I'm tired of Fred's shit, if you know what I mean." Chink shook his head in agreement. "I know just what you mean, but you won't have to worry after today," he said sharply, then turned on his heels and walked towards the bedroom. He didn't bother to knock. He let himself in and closed the door behind him. For a brief minute, Chink just stared down at the sleeping form. As he glanced away from the sleeping man and examined the room, he could feel the hatred building up in him. He remembered George's words as he retold the rape. A blind rage overcame him, and he put the pistol back in his pocket and reached down and slapped the man awake. The cluttered-up bedroom disappeared. Now there was only Chink and a man struggling under his fingers, which were now bands of steel. Each finger seemed to be buried somewhere inside the man's neck because they couldn't be seen on top of Fred's neck. Fred was a different sort of man than George, though. He was wide awake now and struggling for his life. He kicked out, trying to get his feet free from the bedding, but his struggles were useless. Had he been wide awake, Chink might have met his match, but the man was at a disadvantage. When he awoke, Chink had already gotten his stranglehold. "Do you remember Sandra, nigga? Do you?" Chink said as he saw understanding come into the fear-ridden eyes. "That's right, nigga. I'm her man. I know you're sorry, but didn't you enjoy that pussy, man? Didn't you enjoy her ass? Huh? Didn't you? You should have, motherfucker, 'cause you're going to die for it. Was it worth it, nigga? Was it worth it?" Chink spoke in a low voice. The words could hardly be heard by the struggling man if he bothered to pay any attention to them. He tried to break the grip. The fingers just seemed to bury themselves that much deeper. Slowly, Fred's feeble struggles came to a halt, but the man applying the death grip never let up. When the man on the bed changed color, the man doing the choking only added more power. He squeezed until life was indeed gone, until the soul had departed, yet he retained his grip. Tears ran down his cheeks, but it wasn't for the man he had killed. He was picturing his woman under the brutal attack of the man he had killed. Chink glanced around the room and saw a switchblade knife lying on the nightstand next to Fred's wallet. He released his grip, finally, and picked up the knife. Slowly, he cut the dead man's throat. After doing that, he took the knife and plunged it down into his lifeless form's chest. Slowly, Chink shook his head. He cleared his eyes and slowly walked to the door. He opened it and glanced out. He could hear noise coming from the kitchen. For some reason, he had liked the woman who had let him in, so he didn't want to hurt her. He slipped out of the bedroom and tiptoed to the front door. He let himself out quietly, closing the door behind his departure. After reaching the sidewalk, Chink walked faster. He didn't want the woman to glance out and see what kind of car he was driving. He opened the door and got in. Quickly, he started the motor and pulled away from the curb. The first corner he came to, Chink turned and drove towards Western. One down and one to go. If he moved fast enough, it should be done before the morning was over. His debt would be paid. Chapter 9. Back at the prison compound, the morning found the place in an uproar. Rumors flew back and forth between the men confined there. Chink's disappearance had been discovered an hour after he had departed. The body in the woods had been discovered by the farmer's son sometime before 4 o'clock in the morning. The son, not too happy about his mother waking him up to go look for his father, had found the dogs inside the yard as soon as he came out of the farmhouse, so he knew at once something was wrong. After backtracking, he had found his father's body. Then he notified the highway patrol. The first thing that they told him was that a convict had escaped. As soon as the count came up wrong, the highway patrol had been notified to be on the lookout for one black inmate. Later, when daylight came and they examined the grounds, the farmer's son had been the one to find 2 sets of tracks. One led toward the highway, the other led back to the prison compound. For a while, the officers stood around discussing the strange arrangement until the captain showed up. It's simple as hell, he had growled. One bastard got cold feet and ran like hell back to the compound. He glared around at the other officers. He watched them shake their heads in agreement. I think we better root the bastard out right quick, he ordered sharply. How do we go about that little old thing? The night sergeant asked. He was already mad because it happened on his shift. Now that it was becoming clear that it was 2 runners instead of 1, he was in a hurry to get hold of the one that had stayed behind. The captain didn't even bother to answer. He whispered with the lieutenant who was in charge of the highway patrol. They walked over to his car and sat down, talking together. The other officers glanced at each other sheepishly. They couldn't do anything until after their superior officer came back and gave them an order. I wonder what the hell they're up to, one of the deputies asked a guard standing next to him. The guard shrugged his shoulders. It beats the hell out of me. I think they'd be running back to the compound and talking to each son of a bitch locked up there. Somebody knows something, and somebody will talk. I was always under the impression that those guys were pretty close-mouthed, the deputy said, talking just to kill time. That's the coldest shit in town, or else some of that shit you see on television, the guard answered quickly, glad to display his knowledge. Other officers had gathered around the 2 talking men, listening. Them fucking punks up there would snitch on their mothers if they thought it would get them a few days off. Yeah, that's all the captain's got to do. Just go back to the compound and let it be known that whoever comes forward with the information that will help in his case, he'll get maybe a month or 2 off his sentence. And I'll bet within an hour we'll have the other bastard. Another guard shook his head in agreement. You better believe it. John's damn right about that. Well, I wish the hell something would happen, another highway patrolman stated. I'm tired of these fucking bugs that keep flying around in these woods. It seems as if they've taken a personal liking for me, he said as he slapped at his cheek, trying to kill one of the millions of gnats that infested the woods. Hey, an officer in plain clothes yelled. Don't none of you guys walk over there in that area. We want it clean, just like the killers left it, not cluttered up by you guys tracking around over there. The men fell silent as the stretcher bearers came by, carrying the body. The silence held until the men had put the body in the rear of the ambulance and departed. The farmer's son walked up. Well, what are these guys going to do? Stand around with their fingers jammed up their asses for the rest of the fucking day? Take it easy, kid. Just another few minutes and everything will work itself out. Don't worry. The captain isn't sitting over there talking about the weather. You can bet on that, one of the guards stated, shamed by the man's words. The young farmer looked at the guard. And just what the hell were these guards doing last night to allow these murdering bastards to roam around loose? I thought you guys guarded them punks over there and didn't allow them to walk through the woods like they owned them. The sergeant glanced up. Hurt was in his eyes. Listen, son, I understand you're hurt about your father's death, but you and your father have brought prisoners back just so that you could collect the $50 on them, so you know what's happening over there at the compound. I remember the last time your father was there. The captain personally warned him about not taking any chances when arresting these guys because some of them could be dangerous. The sound of another car arriving cut off the farmer's reply. All the men standing in the woods waited silently until the car parked. From where they were, they could see the captain and lieutenant get out of their car and walk over and join the men who had just arrived. They came through the woods together. The new arrival had 2 bloodhounds on their leash. The dogs strained to get loose. The smell of blood excited them. Excitement ran through the crowd of men as they watched the dogs approach. It was just a matter of time now, they knew. Some bastard would be busted before the sun got up in the sky good. The dog handlers led the dogs over to the tracks leading back to the compound. Quickly, the dogs picked up the scent. They started baying at once. Slowly, the men set out on the tracks. The captain waved the sergeant over toward him. Tom, you rush on back and have the men get ready for count. Have each man in his bunk when we get there. Yes, sir, the sergeant answered sharply, then took off on a slow run. He reached the pickup truck that the state supplied for them. In seconds, he was gone in a cloud of dust. The men followed behind the dogs, and everybody was silent, each man deep in his own thoughts. The nearer the dogs got to the building, the louder their barks. The men following almost had to run to keep up. When the sergeant went inside the dormitory, it wasn't necessary for him to explain anything. All he had to do was ring the count bell. The sound of the bell going off set the inmates into motion. They scurried toward their bunks like trained mice. Jimmy glanced up and down the aisle nervously. He kept telling himself over and over again that he didn't have anything to worry about. But why this unscheduled count? Maybe Chink got busted. If so, did Chink involve him? He wondered over and over again. If he had, all he had to do was deny it. It was just a case of his word against Chink's. There was a sudden commotion outside. The men nearest the windows craned their necks trying to see. Suddenly, the rumor came back down the rock. They had bloodhounds inside. The word filled Jimmy with fear. He hadn't thought about that. Dogs! Bloodhounds! He couldn't believe it. They were wrong. Suddenly, the sound of a hound baying came to all the men inside the building. Jimmy's knees started to shake. He wanted to run, but there was nowhere to run. "Oh my God," he cried out suddenly, silently, as he clutched at the bunk for support. It was all over. He knew it. He didn't even glance up when the back door opened and the dogs came in, followed by 8 white men. Before the dogs reached him, they started to strain at the leash. All at once, Jimmy couldn't take any more. He knew the dogs were coming straight for him. He broke and ran. "Stop him!" the captain roared. "God damn it, stop him!" His orders were followed by the quick work of 4 prisoners. They wrestled amongst themselves in their hurry to reach him. Jimmy didn't stand a chance. Even if he had gotten past the 4 inmates who grabbed him, there were more waiting to take the other's place. The captain walked up, followed by the highway patrol officer. "You might as well handcuff the bastard and take him on down to the county jail. See to it, Ed, that the son of a bitch is booked on first-degree murder." "I didn't do it, Captain, I swear! It was Chink!" The words burst from him. He didn't care if the other men thought he was a snitch. It didn't matter right at that moment, even though in later life those very words would end up haunting him to his death. They would brand him as a snitch from that day on. "Please, Captain, please," he begged. The captain glanced down at the man falling on his knees. It was enough to turn his stomach. He hated informers. Too many of them came through his office snitching on their friends. He had to use them because that way he found out about the men who were thinking about running. But he hated them. "Get that sorry motherfucking son of a bitch out of my sight before I end up puking on him," the captain growled. The inmates watched silently as Jimmy was carried out of the dormitory. They would think of Jimmy for a long time. The panic inside Jimmy was finally slowing down. He could think again. Cold reason was coming to him, and he started planning. He believed if he turned state's witness, he would get a break. By the time the deputies delivered their prisoner to the county jail, he was a changed person. Gone was the clinging, begging inmate. In its place was a man who was determined to sell a friend down the river. Chink, to take him along. There was no thought in his mind that, had he waited and allowed Chink to lead the way, they wouldn't have run into the farmer. He was determined to take the witness stand against his friend. Chapter 10. When the call came into the precinct about another murder, this time on Van Ness Street, it was too much of a coincidence for one detective. Detective Vardis Fisher had been up with the murder case of a man and woman killed in an apartment. The woman had been shot, while the man had been strangled to death. Now, another strangling case. When Fisher walked out of the house on Van Ness, he was sure of one thing. The killer was the same person. There was no doubt about that. There couldn't be 2 people who looked like an ape running around killing people. And from all the people he had talked to in the apartment building on Western, the same description kept coming through. He walked slowly towards his car, followed closely by his colored partner, Detective Third Class Jerry Horner. Fisher didn't even bother to glance back at his younger partner. The man just followed along quietly. When they reached the car, Fisher got in on the passenger side. This was out of the ordinary because Fisher generally planned to do the driving himself. After both men got settled in the car, Horner broke the silence. "Well, at least we know it's the same guy killing everybody," Horner stated, watching his white partner out of the corner of his eye. He started the motor, though not sure where they were going. "I think we better go on back to the office, Jerry. Maybe something might have come in to give us a lead on this madness." Fisher spoke quietly as he leaned over and lit a cigarette. Horner just grunted for an answer and followed the command. His mind was occupied with the murders too. The men rode in silence until Fisher spoke. "You know, Jerry, the last guy back there, he was a pretty good-sized man, yet his mother hadn't heard any kind of commotion coming out of the bedroom. He was talking in a monologue, as if he was rehearsing a speech or something." "Yeah, that's the strange thing about it," Fisher continued. "This guy doing these killings must have a hell of a lot of confidence in his own strength. It takes a certain kind of man to have the nerve to walk into another man's home and strangle him to death. I could dig a guy walking in there and firing away with an automatic, but this strangling shit has got me. I mean, we know the guy's got a gun, unless he got rid of it after shooting that woman. So why didn't he use it instead of this other shit? Maybe he was afraid of making noise, but that wouldn't have made any sense. Not when the same guy walked into a fucking apartment building 5 or 6 hours earlier and fired away as if he was out on a firing range. Nah, something's wrong here. The mother didn't recognize the picture of the couple who got hit, but yet we know all three of them were drug users." Horner added his and nodded whenever he thought it was time to. But other than that, he didn't have anything else to add to the conversation. He just drove and listened. When they reached headquarters, Fisher wondered why there were so many highway patrol cars parked. "Oh, that," Horner said, glad for the chance to show that he did know something. "They're probably here because of that escape from the youth's work program camp. I heard something about it just as I was leaving. It seems as if some farmer got killed by the inmate who escaped. It was a brutal killing. He was beat to death with the stock from his shotgun." Fisher sat up, interested. "From the looks of things," he said, waving at the empty parked cars, "they must have caught the bastard already. These guys don't get off their asses unless they think they're going to get their fucking pictures in the paper." Slowly, Horner backed in and parked. "It seems as if our homicide department is going to get its fair share of action for the weekend," he stated dryly. "I got a hunch," Fisher began, "that if we don't hurry up and catch the strangler, we're going to get some more action out of that boy. Maybe he's a nut of some kind, I don't know, but I do believe one thing. We ain't heard the last from our busy hatchet man." The men walked into the building and caught the elevator. The elevator stopped on the 3rd floor, and 2 more detectives got on. They nodded to Horner, but one of them spoke to Fisher. "Well, if it ain't Fish," a gray-haired officer said, "they keeping you busy, boy." Fisher shrugged his shoulders. 25 hours a day, he replied, then added, "Where are you guys off to this early? I've never ever seen you off your coffee break this early in my life." The officer shook some papers in his hand. "It's that fucking farmer's case. You know, the one that got killed last night while trying to stop 2 inmates from escaping," he continued before Fisher could ask any questions. "Well, they caught the one that stayed behind. I'm on my way up to interrogate him, and from what I understand, he's ready to help us all he can. He wants to be a state's witness against his partner, who he claims did the killing." The men laughed. "They all say that," Fisher stated coldly. "Whenever you catch one, it's always the other one who did the killing. Well, good luck with that." As the elevator stopped on their floor, the other detective spoke up before getting out. "In this case, it ain't hard to believe," he stated loudly as he got out. "The son of a bitch that got away looks more like a fucking animal to me than anything else. A fucking gorilla or something," he yelled back over his shoulder. Fisher was 1 step ahead of his partner as he stuck his foot in the elevator door, stopping it from closing. Both men nearly ran out of the elevator. The other set of detectives stopped in their tracks and stared at the men running toward them. "What's the matter?" the gray-haired one asked in surprise. "I'm not sure, Al, but it just might be that you've given me the key I need to break open my case," Fisher said seriously. Horner and Fisher followed Al and his partner into the interrogation room. As they waited for them to bring Jimmy in, Fisher studied the mugshots of Chink. "Yeah, I can see what they mean," Fisher said, speaking to no one in particular. He held the picture out for Horner to inspect. Horner shook his head in agreement. The picture of the young boy was bestial to a degree. His hair was uncombed, probably from lying on a hard bunk and being called out to have a mugshot taken. A turnkey led Jimmy into the room, then departed. Jimmy glanced around nervously. "Sit down, kid. Nobody's gonna hurt you over here. We just want to hear what you got to say, that's all. Here, have a smoke," the detective called Al said and held out his pack. Jimmy took one of the cigarettes, then leaned back in his chair. Al's partner held up a folder. "Well, Jimmy," he said, "just start talking and tell us everything from the beginning." "Hey, man," Jimmy said quickly, "I want some kind of understanding, man. Are you guys gonna give me a break if I turn over a B as state's witness?" "Break hell," Al said sharply, coming up from his chair. "Boy, you're implicated in a murder. Now, you can talk if you want to, if you think it'll help. We'll listen. But as far as a deal, get it out of your mind. We got your ass on murder, and we can try you on first degree if we want to." Al's partner took it up, coming in with the soft stuff to win Jimmy over. "Now, Jimmy, what my partner says is true, but I'll promise you this, and I'm sticking my neck out when I say it. But if you talk and what you say helps us to catch up with your partner, well, I'll personally try and get your charge reduced." By now, Jimmy was in a cold sweat. He hadn't expected it to go like it was going. He had been sure the officers would offer him a cop. "Man, if I talk and it ain't gonna help me, why, what's the use of talking?" He hesitated, then added, "I ain't killed nobody, man. I mean that." The detectives glanced at each other. Then Al's partner took it up. "Well, Jimmy, I'll tell you this much. We got the murder weapon, and it's full of prints. Now, if your prints ain't on it, well, boy, you stand a good chance." "A good chance of what?" He didn't say, and Jimmy didn't bother to ask. The mention of the murder weapon showed him his way out. He knew he hadn't left any prints because he had never touched a gun. Jimmy started talking, and for the next hour, he talked while the detectives just listened. When Jimmy first spoke of Chink, Fisher started to interrupt, but he respected his fellow officers too much for that. He decided to wait until they had finished questioning Jimmy, then he could ask his questions. The interrogation went on for over 2 hours. Then the detectives prepared a statement and pushed it in front of Jimmy to sign. He signed without even bothering to see what he was putting his name to. He had put his confidence completely in the policemen. Whatever they did, he would have to go along with now. "Al, when you finish, I'd like to ask him a few personal questions," Fisher said from the sideline. Al waved his hand magnanimously. "Go ahead, Fish. We got just about everything we'll need. If we find we forgot something, we'll know where to pick him up at." He laughed as if he had really said something funny. Fisher walked up to the table and glanced down at the frightened man. "Jimmy, you said that after Chink saw his woman on visiting day, he started bugging you to run away with him." Jimmy shook his head in agreement. "That's right, man. Like I said, somebody had beat the shit out of her, and Chink wanted my help once we got free to help him handle these guys." Fisher's expression never changed as he stared down into the man's eyes. "Then would you say that Chink would probably be afraid to go up against these guys by himself?" The question caught Jimmy by surprise. As he closed his eyes and saw Chink, he couldn't imagine the man being afraid of anyone. "Well, I don't know about that, man. To be truthful with you, I don't think Chink is afraid of anything or anybody, man." "Well, why did you say Chink wanted your help once you two got free then? If he's not frightened, I don't see why in the fuck would he need your help," Fisher said brutally, finally getting tired of the lies he knew Jimmy was telling. "Listen, bro," Horny said, speaking for the first time since entering the tiny room. He stepped up to the small table that Jimmy sat in front of. "We don't give a shit why you ran away or what happened, so don't bullshit us. All we're interested in is Chink. Now, tell the fucking truth. You mentioned that Chink's woman had been beat up. Who did it? What does she look like? And where can we reach her?" Jimmy glanced up at the colored detective. "I don't know where she stays, man. All she did was give my wife a ride home. As far as what she looked like, She had a large bandage on one side of her face, but that's about all I could tell you. Other than that, her name was Sandra. Oh yeah, he added as an afterthought. I think she was busted on his case with him, but she didn't get any time out of it for some reason. A smile broke across Fisher's face. He patted his partner on the back. I believe we got something we can go on now, he stated happily. Who was it who was supposed to pick you guys up on the highway? Fisher asked suddenly. Jimmy shook his head. I don't know, man. Chink never would say, but I believe it was his woman, 'cause he hadn't planned on running away until the day she came and visited him all beat up. What kind of car was she driving? Al asked sharply. It was a Ford, but Chink said something about her getting another one, so I figured she was the one who was going to pick us up. Fisher turned to his partner. I believe we gotten all we need from this punk. Let's go and check on women's division. From there, we should be able to get a lead on this Sandra. Maybe she's on probation or something. Fisher raised his arm and waved at the other detectives. Thanks, Al. I think I got what I came for and more. He led the way out of the tiny room. Jerry, while I'm at women's division, you run up to the probation department and check it out. I'll meet you back at our department as soon as you're finished, okay? Horner shook his head in agreement. Okay, Fisher, he replied, not mentioning what he really wanted to say, which was that they have been on the case since midnight, and it seemed to him that they could turn the fucking case over to the day shift and take their asses home. But that wasn't Fisher's way of doing things. He'd run around like a chicken with his head cut off until he damn near dropped from fatigue. Chapter 11. After leaving Fred's house, Chink drove slowly as he planned his next move. He noticed the gas gauge and stopped and filled up the tank. When he pulled out of the gas station, he fell in behind all the morning traffic. The cars were bumper to bumper, so it took him a while to reach the east side. He searched out the address, driving down the street slowly until he came to the apartment building where Tree lived. He parked, got out, and studied the street carefully before going into the building. The steps were old and creaky, and it seemed as if the noise would wake everybody in the building. He grinned as he realized that the people who lived in the building were probably so used to hearing the steps cry out every time someone used them that it was a normal sound to them. He stopped on the second floor and started searching for the apartment number George had given him. He came to the apartment and stood outside, listening. He could hear sounds coming from the inside. He leaned closer, putting his ear next to the door. He finally figured out that the sounds were made by children. He knocked sharply on the door. Who is it? The question was asked by a woman. Chink hesitated briefly, then said, It's Fred, honey. I'm looking for Tree. Suddenly, the door was open widely. Before the woman could close it, Chink had stepped inside. She stared at him coldly. You ain't Fred, she said. I don't know what Fred you're talking about, Chink replied, but my name is Fred. He glared at her, then asked harshly, Where's Tree? She seemed to make up her mind all at once. He's in there, she said, and pointed at the bedroom. At the same time, the bedroom door opened and Tree glanced out. He was still in his shorts. He stared angrily around until he saw Chink. Then he ducked back in the bedroom, slamming the door behind him. His sister stared at the action stupidly. Chink broke into a run and hit the door with his shoulder. The thin bedroom door burst open. Chink fumbled at his waist for the pistol as he fell into the room. Tree hadn't wasted any time. He had run straight back to his bed and snatched his own pistol out from under the pillow. One look at Chink, and he had quickly realized why the man was there. He didn't know how the man had found him and didn't waste any time thinking about it. He came up with his pistol and fired wildly as Chink came tumbling into the room. His first shot hit the wall, but as Chink fumbled with his gun, Tree took his time and fired again. His second shot hit Chink in the stomach, and his third one hit the huge young man somewhere in his wide chest. Neither shot seemed to have any effect on Chink. It was as if he had been programmed to do something, and nothing could stop him. Tree watched in horror as he raised the gun. He started to toss his own gun down and run, but there was nowhere to go but past the man in the doorway. Either that or jump out of the window, and neither idea seemed too good. Chink fired, and the shot took Tree between his eyes. He fell back as if he was clubbed by a giant blow. Chink fired again, then walked over to the fallen body and shot him in the back of the head. He bent down and picked up the pistol Tree had used. He stuck it in his waistband. As Chink started from the room, he stumbled once, then caught himself and made his way out, walking slowly. Tree's sister stood holding her hand to her mouth, her kids around her. Fear was something she had known many times before, but as she saw the expression on the big man's face as he came out of the bedroom, she felt a cold, numbing fear that seemed to chill her very bones. She couldn't move. She could only stare wildly and pray that the man wouldn't kill her and her children. Death was there in his face. But as she watched him make his slow way, she suddenly realized that if she stayed out of his way, he wouldn't bother them. She clutched the children closer and watched him leave. She stood that way, not bothering to go to the window to see how he left. She didn't want to know anything about the man who had walked in and killed her brother. And she was sure without even looking in the bedroom that Tree was dead. Something told her that the man who had just left wouldn't have left until after Tree was dead. Whatever Tree had done, he had done to the wrong man. Chink walked down the steps slowly. He wanted to just lie down somewhere, but the picture of Sandra waiting on him came to his mind, and he continued on his way. He finally got down the steps, ignoring the people who came out of the apartments and stared at him. Before he reached the outside door, he remembered he still carried his gun in his hand. He stuffed the pistol down in his waistband next to the one he had stuck there earlier. The walk to the car was harder than anything he had ever attempted before. Coming down the steps, he had something to hold on to, but trying to reach the car was another matter. There was nothing to balance himself with, and the pain in his stomach was exploding. He had never felt such a burning fire before. When he reached the car, he fell up against it. He pushed himself upright and managed to get the door open. Then he fell in and stretched out on the seat. Something in his mind warned him that this wouldn't do at all. He sat up and managed to start the motor. As he slipped the car in gear, he glanced at the people who had followed him out of the building. They stood around in a small group, staring after him. He drove away slowly, fighting the steering wheel all the way. The drive back across town was a nightmare for him. Whenever he stopped for a red light, he almost passed out. The pain was something he had to cope with. Sandra, he called the name over and over again. Whenever he felt like quitting, he managed to call up an image of her. When Chink stopped at a light at 87th Street, he felt as if the end had come. The front seat of the car was soaked with blood, and his hands were coated with blood. He held his hand to his stomach, trying to push back the pain. If only his woman was there. The cars behind began to blow as the light had changed to green. He glanced up out of a fog of pain. He managed to push his foot down on the gas pedal and pull away from the light. Sandra paced the floor back and forth. Ever since Chink had left, she had been up worrying about him. Suppose he was hurt somewhere. He didn't have anyone he could turn to other than her. She made some coffee, but didn't have any taste for it, so she poured it out. She started her pacing again, then glanced out of the window and noticed the nosy old caretaker watering the lawn. He watched her staring out of the window, then raised his hand and waved. She didn't want to acknowledge it, but she knew she'd better. He was like an old woman, as she knew from the few times she had spoken to him. He always had some kind of gossip about the other people who lived in the building. The last thing she was interested in was what the other people did. If they left her alone, she sure in hell would leave them alone. He was just a nosy old man, she reasoned, with nothing else to fill an empty life other than an occasional glimpse into someone else's affairs. She turned away from the window in disgust. Glancing out wouldn't bring Chink home. When he finished what he had to do, he'd come home. At 91st Street, Chink knew he was finished. He couldn't go on. The fire inside him was too much. He sat at the wheel, holding his stomach with one hand. Sweat rolled off his brow. He could feel a tear rolling down his cheek. Now that's too much, he told himself. Here I am crying like a bitch instead of getting home to my woman. He caught the light and pulled off again. 1 block, 2 blocks, 3 blocks. He counted them off in his mind. He caught himself driving crazy with the car going back and forth across the yellow line. He talked to himself, cursing in his own weakness. I ain't nothing but a poo butt, he yelled out so that he could hear the sound of his voice. Again, he called on his memory, and the flash of his woman appeared before him. She was waiting with open arms. He was convinced he was going to die, and he knew then that he couldn't die without seeing his woman again. Just one more time, Lord, he prayed, then wondered about calling on the Lord. It was something he had never done before. The lights began to play tricks on him. He couldn't tell the green lights from the red ones, and more than once he pulled out in front of oncoming traffic. Drivers slammed on their brakes and blew their horns angrily. He drove on, unaware of the confusion he left behind him. Finally, he reached his neighborhood, yet he was unaware of that too. It was more like an animal instinct that made him turn on his street. He almost passed the apartment building, but caught himself and pulled to the curb. The old man in front of the building watched him closely. Chink didn't even see the old man. The pain was becoming so unbearable that he only had room in his mind for one thought: to see Sandra before he died. He was like a hurt animal returning to his lair, searching for the place where he believed he could find peace. He tried to open the car door, but he found that his strength had deserted him. To have come so far and yet not be able to finish the trip. He leaned over, and one of his huge arms fell on the horn. The sound was especially loud on the quiet street. The blare of the horn went on, and Chink had passed out while lying on top of it. The sound of the blaring horn brought Sandra on the run. She noticed the old caretaker moving toward the car. Damn, she cursed to herself as she reached the bottom of the steps. In seconds, she was at the car door. She jerked it open and caught Chink's body as he fell out. Hold on, honey, she murmured, putting her arm around him. Chink, you got to wake up, she yelled in his ear as she noticed the caretaker drawing near. Chink! Chink! She screamed at him. What to do, where to go, she thought to herself. If I go upstairs with him, the goddamn caretaker is sure to call the police. Move over, honey. Try and roll over, she said into his ear as she shoved at the heavy body. She knew at once that she couldn't go back up the steps. Before they could get up the steps, the police would be at the door. So she got in beside him, pushing as hard as she could. Could you use some help? The question came from the side of the car. Sandra glanced up and saw the caretaker staring in. She knew at once that the man had noticed the blood all over the front seat of the car. No, I don't need any help. I've got to get him to the hospital. He's been in an accident, she said as she started the car up. She tried to move him over another inch so that she could drive. You want me to go along with you to help you get him out? The caretaker offered. No, thank you, she said flatly, and pulled away from the curb. As she looked back in the mirror, she noticed him take a pencil out of his pocket and start to write. The bastard took the license number, she said, not really speaking to Chink, but just speaking out loud. Sandra, don't let them take me alive, baby. I told you I couldn't stand spending the rest of my life in prison, Chink managed to say as he struggled to sit up. She glanced at him, thankful that he was still alive. Don't worry, baby. I'll take care of you, she answered with more confidence than she felt. Chink reached over and patted her leg. Then he slumped down on the seat, holding his stomach. It burns so, he muttered over and over. It's finished, honey. It's all over. We don't have to worry about our debt anymore. She smiled and patted him on the cheek. I knew it was, Daddy. When I saw you in the car, she answered. Chink, I don't know where to go unless I go back to our old apartment. I still got the key and the rent is still paid up. She glanced down at him to see if that was all right, but he fell asleep. She felt under his shirt for his heartbeat, and her hand came from under his shirt full of blood. Don't worry, Daddy. I'll take care of you, she murmured as she turned the corner. Sandra drove swiftly, cutting in and out of the traffic until she pulled up in front of the old apartment. She parked as close as she could get, then bent down and tried to wake Chink up. She knew it was impossible for her to get him up the steps without some kind of help. "Wake up, Daddy. Wake up. I need your help. Just wake up long enough to help me get you up the steps. Then I'll take care of that wound." From somewhere in a deep fog, Chink heard Sandra's voice. He knew she was asking him to do something. What was it? "Wake up!" The words came over and over again. He fought to open his eyes. Slowly, he managed to sit up. A moan escaped from him, but he did sit up. "That's just great, Daddy," she said. Then she got out and went around the car. She opened the passenger door and grabbed one of his arms. She slowly pulled him from the car. She put his arm around her neck and started up the path. They made their way slowly. The steps were a little more difficult, but they managed to get up them. Sandra fumbled in her pocket and found the key. She opened the door and got Chink inside, and he slipped to the floor as soon as they entered. This concludes this edition of Ralph Reads. I would like to thank you, queens and kings, fellow royalty, for stopping by. You may connect with me on Twitter and Instagram as well as Periscope at rgmc2407. Drop me an email at rgmc2407@gmail.com, where you can use the Zelle app if you would like to leave a small donation. And you may also go to paypal.me/rgmc2407 or the Cash App. My cash tag is rgmc2407. You may also find me on my very own channel, RGMC, Ralph Garcia, Master of Ceremonies, as well as right here at home on the United Ronin Networks. We are Ronin. Fellow royalty, pick up a good book, read a good story, and set your good self free. I appreciate you, and I love you like cooked food. I will see you fellow kings and queens on the next edition of Ralph Reads. Butu Elamu.